All right, can everyone hear me? Microphone's working? Okay. Well, welcome to the afternoon, everyone. I hope you're all enjoying the day. Again, my name is Trevor Lehmann. I am going to be moderating for today, and I'm so glad we have a really vibrant group to talk a little bit more about the climate issues facing us. So I'm going to go around with introductions. Curt, I apologize, I didn't have your biography, so when I get to you, if you could update, introduce yourself, that would be fantastic. To your microphone's working as well?
I think so. Well, one of the first questions is what got you involved in climate change, and maybe that'll be enough of an introduction to me.
Okay, sounds
Don't worry
good.
about it.
Yeah, so to my right is MJ McCarron. McCarron is the outreach coordinator for Camp Morningstar, a group of land protectors who've held sacred space for proposed silica sand mines on the community trapline of Hollow Water First Nation over the last 5 years. A longtime educator and fierce advocate for climate justice, MJ developed a school program to educate groups on the current connections between colonization, the Indian Act, and resource extraction. Through land-based activities that allow participants to see the land through the Indigenous lens, students come away with a sense of how to process and the regulations needed to make change within government to ensure Indigenous people are free from climate injustice through free, prior, and informed consent. Next is Laura Cameron from IISD and Just Transitions. Laura Cameron is a researcher and community organizer working for climate justice as a guest on Treaty 1 territory. She works in the as a climate policy analysis and has volunteered with the Manitoba Energy Justice Coalition for the past 7 years on campaigns aimed at stopping the Line 3 pipeline, solidarity with Wet'suwet'en, and the Trans Mountain Expansion Pipeline resistance, as well as Big Bank fossil fuel divestment. And Glen Koroluk started his work as the executive director of the Manitoba Eco Network in January 2019. Before that, they worked in the private sector with an environmental software company, was the community housing and grants coordinator for the Inner City Neighborhood Renewal Corporation. They've also worked for various national, provincial, and non-governmental organizations in Manitoba for almost 20 years as a campaigner and community organizer. Glen volunteers as a board member with the National Farmers Foundation and holds a BSc from the University of Winnipeg, focused on geography and statistics. We'll get into questions in just a moment, but I'd like everyone to give a big round of applause for our panelists. All right, so beyond the initial introductions, I'd like everyone to maybe give a little bit more of an explanation of, yourself and the organization or organizations you're associated with, maybe what brought you into the climate movement. And Curt, maybe I'll start with you if you want to introduce.
Okay, thanks, Trevor. Okay, I got into the climate movement in 2006 when I'm an electrical engineer and spent 25 years in industry. I was director of quality systems for most of that time. And throughout that time, I was, raising my kids and doing some commuter cycling and backpacking and that kind of thing. But in 2006, I went to see a movie by a fella named Al Gore. A lot of people. And within 8 months of seeing that movie, I was working full-time on climate change. It affected me that much. And I started 8 months after seeing the movie with Climate Change Connection, the organization I'm still with 17 years later, and working with Climate Change Connection to educate Manitobans about climate change and working on solutions. So most of the work that I've been doing has been to craft solutions to climate change, working with all kinds of different organizations on what that solution looks like. And most recently, working with a coalition of organizations called the Climate Action Team on a specific set of recommendations for a solution called the Road to Resilience. That's me.
Perfect. Thank you, Curt.
why am I here? Okay. So when I was younger, I was really into competitive sports, and I think I had a few too many concussions playing soccer. But no, I have been involved in environmental issues for all my life. My parents are from the farm, so they're agrarian. And as a kid, as a youth, I would spend my summer holidays at my mom's parents' subsistence farm in southeastern Manitoba. So I grew up understanding as to how one lives off the land. So that was sort of my background and what brought me into doing environmental work. Um, the Manitoba Eco Network, the organization I currently work for right now, is now celebrating its like 40th anniversary this year. So it was a grassroots organization that started way back in 1984, and it's an organization I've worked for and been on the board for many years. And their whole mandate is to collaborate and work with others in the environmental sector to do the work that really needs to be done. So I'm glad to be here. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. This is really nice to see a room full of people talking about climate. It hasn't happened very often, at least since like in the last 4 years since COVID, in my experience. So yeah, thanks to the organizers for putting on this training. I am here representing the Manitoba Energy Justice Coalition, and there's many other MEJC people, as the acronym calls us, in the room. So it feels funny to kind of like be talking about the work that we do when there's so many familiar faces. So if I say something wrong, people feel free to interject. But yeah, my name's Laura. How I got into the climate movement. Originally, I was sort of studying biology in my undergrad about 10 years ago or so. And I was learning all about climate change sort of for the first time. I didn't really have a lot of education in high school. And, you know, I thought I wanted to go on and become like a doctor or something. And then the more I learned and the more I sort of uncovered in my school, the more I sort of became alarmed about, you know, the state of where we're at and the years to come. And at the same time, I sort of saw on campus there was a really active divestment group at McGill. And so I, over the course of a year, sort of worked up the courage to attend a meeting. And once I was there, I sort of never looked back and formed a really solid community within that group. And really that was like my onboarding into a lot of like training of like organizing theory and how to think strategically about campaigning, how to like target the president of McGill and who are the influencers, and kind of thinking about this campaign. It was really like fertile ground for like new organizers and activists through the divestment movement. And we organized like week-long kind of campouts and really great events. And since then, I've lived in different places, and I've always sort of like initially dug into whatever climate justice organizing is happening there, because that's just where you can like find community and also find that kind of outlet or like way to take action, even if you don't work on climate in your day job. It's amazing to have community organizing as a way that anyone can really plug in and do something. And I really believe in like that collectively we have a lot more impact than we do as individuals making individual choices. So I guess a little intro to Manitoba Energy Justice Coalition. I started organizing, volunteering with MEJC when I moved to Winnipeg in 2017, and the group was actually started a couple years prior to that in opposition to the Energy East pipeline, which some people might remember was a proposed pipeline to run from Alberta all the way to the East Coast. And that was back then, it sort of really felt like a sure bet at some points, but there was a lot of really coordinated resistance efforts with communities all across the prairies and Eastern Canada, and Indigenous communities, and many folks really raising the alarm and concern about that. And it was in, I think, 2017 or 2018 that project was actually canceled. So that was a huge victory. And since then, MEJC has been taken up a number of different campaigns, which I'll maybe talk a little bit more about later. But just to list a few of them, we work on responsible hydro development. So there's a lot of problems with Manitoba hydro development in the north, and we have been working a lot in solidarity with hydro-affected communities to try to raise awareness about that, especially in southern Manitoba. What else? We've done a lot of solidarity work with resistance against other fossil fuel projects or fossil fuel kind of adjacent projects with the Trans Mountain expansion, Wet'suwet'en solidarity work, a lot of divestment actions targeting RBC and other big banks funding fossil fuel pipelines. And we really try to keep, that kind of justice focus within our work. So it's not only about, the energy transition, but it's about thinking about what does environmental justice look like? What does Indigenous leadership in the clean transition look like? And how do we make sure that we're not just addressing emissions, but we're also addressing kind of the underlying unjust systems that are fueling climate change. So I'll just stop there, I think. Before I go on.
I taught junior high. They can probably hear me in Saskatchewan, so I'm not sure I need this mic. If it's too loud, just put your hand up. My name is MJ McCarron. I came here to Manitoba on my 25th birthday. Worked in an Indigenous community, married into an Indigenous community, and that was 40 some odd years ago. So my interest in Camp Morningstar, it was a sacred camp. A teepee went up in the middle of the night when a silica sand company chose to move onto the land with big machinery without consent. Community consent is an issue. And since then, we have fought the provincial system, and it was just announced last week that our final appeal is done. And they're going ahead with the mine. It's a small area. It would be like taking Assiniboine Park here, building a mine. There's 3 communities, 4 cottage communities, and a campground. All around it. It's got 2 rivers and a lake. So it's quite destructive. They cleared 64 hectares of land before they had a license. That was moose birthing ground. We found moose down in the res surrounded by dogs. My job is to try and get word out to people and to create alliances with our elders and our people that are working on the ground in Camp Morningstar. And to also illustrate all the things that have been talked about so far this morning. And here are some raw, concrete examples of how that works and how that's not working for our communities. So what's about to happen is tragic. We've got 150 years of being moved off land, being moved for mining. In fact, we've got a letter from the 1800s. So we've got a cumulative crisis on our hands. And I'm here because I'm a mom and I'm going to have my first grandchild. And I remember back to my geography teachers in high school telling us what was going to happen. And I'm just really sad I haven't done more. So again, I'm here to connect and to help us realize that one voice can make a difference. And we're not stopping. So stay tuned. CampMorningstar.org.
Thank you for the introductions, everyone. I think we've really got a real sort of spectrum of different professionals here working in different fields and also really facing a lot of different challenges and solutions being brought up in different areas. I think when we often look at these sort of barriers and solutions as sort of being these, I was wondering if for the panelists, they wanted to take a little bit of time to talk about in Manitoba in particular, but if there is something in another province you wanted to highlight that is sort of the main thing that you feel that you would need support with or would like to be addressed right now, and what would be something that would be helpful?
Am I live? More than you want. I think the thing is that with climate justice and with issues that are especially facing the North, I can remember being up on the hydro jams and being absolutely shocked at what I saw. And, you know, the amount of debris and taking a boat out and going over a tree that was in the water that used to be obviously on land, and what that destruction looked like. And the fact that nobody had figured out that there was permafrost and that was going to be a permanent situation of, you know, land, you know, seeping into the waters, let alone cleanup or anything else. So I was really shocked, and that really kind of got me going on things. And then this particular environmental piece, it's about amplifying the message. I've heard over and over and over again that we were too small. You know, when we went through, you know, tried to get CEC support, you're a couple of tons short of sand. So you don't qualify, you know, your story is too small. It's not worth reporting. It's not worth telling. And so you get that kind of attitude over and over and over again. So my big question is, how do we amplify each other? How do we support each other in our, you know, interests? I've got tremendous support here from allies that have recognized and just joined and done some tremendous work for us. Glen, you know, drove crazy because I don't really know anything. I'm a mom. I'm a teacher. I don't know anything about science. I don't know anything about policy or how the province works. And if I don't know, how do you expect communities to know? And how do you expect communities to be able to have the resources to be able to stand up and voice whatever it is that they need to voice? So, you know, we can all play a role in that. Tomorrow, I'm going to be doing a climate justice group and talking a little bit about my experiences with that. So there's promise here. I mean, look who's around the room. Look at the voices that you've heard tomorrow. You know, amplification is absolutely key, and we can all help each other. Take, for example, everybody, I'm sorry, I'm a little bit frustrated after 5 years of fighting for this cause. But, you know, when you say you're, you know, I'm on Treaty 1 territory, you know, you can also do some research and say, I'm on, you know, I'm going to acknowledge Treaty 8 territory and the dams that are happening there, and just something quickly that makes that acknowledgement have power. So we can move on. We can do it.
Yeah, when I think about this question, I guess the first thing that came to my mind was, what are kind of the challenges that we face in doing this work, like internally to organizing, and also as individuals, or as myself as an individual. I think you know, sustainability in activism is a really I think recurring kind of challenge for a lot of organizers and climate activists. The problem feels so big and it feels so urgent, and there's always, you know, so many fires to put out, and you know, like a real impending kind of timeline, and it's hard to step back and try to set boundaries and try to work, you know, sustainably, try to build long-term relationships, and not just kind of be running ourselves into the ground and then burning out and then needing to sort of, you know, take a lot of time off. That's something that I think we see too often in the climate movement, and we need to like think better about how yeah, how to address that, and how to like move a little bit slower and move a bit more kind of with depth in our relationships and in our organizing. I think we have been learning that lesson in MEJC for a while. Yeah, I think that the challenge of organizing through the pandemic is still kind of with us. We move, you know, switch to online meetings, and it's just a different and more challenging way to relate, which I think we all know at this point. But even sort of bouncing back from the pandemic, I think I've heard not only within MEJC, but other sort of grassroots organizing groups, that it's really hard. Like, people are still sort of lacking energy. People are still getting sick all the time. We still need to like take precautions to keep people safe, and we just can't really operate in the same kind of way, in the same level that we were before the pandemic. And yeah, I think one of the sort of strengths and challenges of MEJC's model is also that it is a volunteer-run kind of grassroots organization, so people can come and go and participate as they like. But you know, that it makes it a little bit harder to, that flexibility also brings some challenges of you know, people stepping back when work is needed and so on, and not necessarily having the capacity that we would like to have all the time. And then, yeah, I would echo MJ's points about like the broader kind of barriers of the industry and the kind of entrenched forces that we're up against, which are massive and especially, yeah, the fossil fuel industry, mining industries that have, you know, unlimited budget and political capital to push forward these projects, and that, you know, the sort of, especially around like greenwashing of critical minerals and other mining like silica sands for renewable energy. Those are some of the pieces that I think we really need to bring attention to. And as far as what some of the like solutions are to these challenges, I don't know exactly, but it does feel like there's a lot of so there's a lot of interest and there's a lot of concern in climate change, like that's grown exponentially even in the last 10 years that I've been involved. And so I think that is where I see sort of the hope and the fact that, you know, this, that we're all here today and these trainings are happening across the country, and there's more and more kind of climate justice groups and there's more young people involved. And it does feel like, you know, we're kind of regaining that momentum that we had before the pandemic. And yeah, I think that's where I find some hope.
There are two barriers that come to mind, and they are interrelated. One of them is I'll use the word apathy, but it's a lack of a sense of alarm or that there's an emergency relative to the climate emergency, and that has changed over time. But there's, you know, public perception of whether or not this is an emergency is one of the challenges. The other one is who's in government and what leadership role are they taking. Those are two things that are related, and I'll draw the connection. You know, having worked on this for 17 years full time, I can see a shift in public perception going from initially I was spending a lot of time with deniers and people didn't think it was a problem and stuff like that. And I'm seeing more and more alarm coming from people looking at this and not thinking that a warm winter is a good thing, instead saying this is not right, something's wrong, but then not knowing what to do about it and not understanding what their role is, because a lot of times the media or whatever, they get messaging that says, this is your fault, you got to do something to fix it. And they don't know what to do. And that connects me to the other barrier, which is government leadership. Most of the work that I do is in policy development and policy promotion with leaders. And over the course of those 17 years, I've gone through different governments, both federally and provincially and municipally, with different levels of engagement and acceptance. I mean, I went through the Harper years and went through 7 years of PC government. And I have to say that in October 2nd last year, I said one of two things is going to happen October 4th, because we had a provincial election in October 3rd. I said, either I'm going to retire because I can't do this anymore, or I'm going to put all of my effort into this. Luckily, things changed on October 3rd, and I'm working full time on this thing. And I've had more meetings with this government in the last 4 months than I've had in 7 years with the previous government. And they aren't just nodding and sort of like, instead of like, tell us what you think we should do. And I've given them all kinds of papers, and the work that I do with the Road to Resilience provides, and Laura's contributed to it. I mean, it's one of the authors of one of the chapters. And we've put together a framework that is actionable, right? And that's what the antidote to that. I've gone from apathy or denial to alarm, but now what do we do about it? And having the framework in the Road to Resilience gives you a true framework of actions, whether it's in agriculture or whether it's in buildings or whether it's in transportation or whatever. There are concrete examples in there. And I'm going to get into some of the details with some of the sections on some subsequent questions. So that's me.
So I just want to make sure everyone knows that I'm here as Glen and Koroluk, and some of the things that I say may not be reflective of the organization that I'm working for. So the two board members are here, put your earplugs on. Just kidding. So I'm addressing this from more from a perspective of not just looking at the climate movement, but sort of the work in the environmental sector and the environmental justice sector. So, and it's from being a worker in that sector. I've spent a lot of my life volunteering in different causes and stuff, but just being someone who's employed in the ENGO sector and what some of the barriers are, and that I've noticed over the years, and everyone knows them. You know, we sometimes we work in silos. Sometimes we're fixated on single issues. I feel like when I'm working in Manitoba, I'm so isolated. I don't know what's happening in the west of the world. So there's this regional disconnect that I sometimes feel I have working in this province. Then there's, we're always competing for resources. There's limited, money out there for us to do the work that we want to do. And then, as Curt has brought up, there's unattentive and unresponsive governments. So that's a big barrier. So I do have some solutions for some of this. I'd like to see more regional cooperation, and I'm glad that Adrian is here, working in 3 different provinces. We're the Prairies. It's a big eco zone. So if we could do more regional work like that, I think that's a good step to go towards. So I was part back in the 90s of the Canadian Environmental Network, and they lost all their funding during the Harper government, but they used to contract with the federal environment departments to do consultations with the ENGO community across the country, and to provide policy advice to government. And that was an excellent model. They worked through caucuses, different issues. The Canadian Environmental Network is up and running a bit. It's smaller now, but they've got a very successful environmental assessment caucus, and they just started up a new toxics caucus. And they also got one they want to start up on biodiversity. So that sort of regional cooperation and seeing what everyone's doing across the country is very important, being in this place in the world. The other thing I'd like to see is a new way for government to give grants out to us for our work and advocacy and sort of projects that we're doing on the ground. The model that they have right now just doesn't work. So I would like to see the new NDP government develop and put more trust in our community to decide how we give out the money and for what purposes. So that would be something worth working towards. And I feel you about quitting too the last provincial election, because it does get frustrating. But we all need to engage in the political process. It's like the way we make our laws is through the political process. We have political parties. We have some that have bad philosophies and some that have good ones. So more of us have to get involved in that process as party members and influence from that perspective, because that's where some of our policies come from. They come from within the political parties process. They have conventions every year. They have resolutions, and those are the things that they'll decide to make law on. So that's a very important thing that we have to do. I've got a couple of things that are very specific to Winnipeg. I've said this before, but in case you haven't heard it from me, is for Winnipeg, I think we need an environmental alliance of all the groups that are working on different things within the environment. A good example was one of my favorite groups back in the 90s was the Toronto Environmental Alliance. And they were quite radical, but they brought all the interests to the table, and they worked together, and they put a lot of pressure on city council. And we have lots of good groups in the city doing that kind of work, but we kind of do focus on this issue, that issue, and sometimes we work together, sometimes we don't. So I think we need an alliance in Winnipeg of environmental groups to start pushing that agenda. And along that same line is, I don't know, maybe I'm dating myself a bit, but back in the 90s, there was a political organization at the city level. It was called Winnipeg into the 90s, WIN for short. So it was a political party at the civic level. It was like an alliance of center and leftist center organizations, like it'd be NDP, Liberal. Labor was involved, environmental groups were involved, social justice groups were involved. And what we did at that time is we endorsed candidates running for City Hall. And one of the candidates we did endorse, I think it was in the 92 election, was Greg Selinger, who was running for mayor at that time. So I think we need another political structure like that at in our city to get more different movements working together and getting better people elected at council. Anyway, that's what I got.
Thank you, everyone. I heard a real range of different ideas sort of put forward there, and I wanted to touch too. I know Laurie had sort of started, I think, that talking about where she sort of sees the hope in areas, and Curt and Glen had both highlighted certain areas that they saw as changes coming, and MJ had sort of talked a little bit about the workshop as well, that this will be continuing tomorrow. I'm sorry, I'm naming everyone here. It's not making it easy to see where the mic's going. But I was wanting a sort of an open question next, and this can, if people want to elaborate further on their solutions, they can, but also, you know, I know the environmental work can have a lot of good days, and there are days when we have wins, and there are days when we don't. And I'm kind of curious, because we have a range of professional experiences here and activism, what keeps us going? What gets us, you know, to the days where we celebrate wins and through the days where we don't?
Anyone want to go first?
So, I mean, Camp Morningstar for me was lovely and beautiful. I mean, it's an unfortunate state right now where the community has lost at this point in time, but the community did not lose. I mean, seeing all the amazing stuff that was done there and how the grassroots got together and how families got together and how they learned how systems worked and how they fought. I mean, seeing that and witnessing that is what keeps me going from day to day. I come from the hogwatch days, the wars we had in Manitoba, where the hog expansion was just growing exponentially. I was one of the people who helped start Hogwatch Manitoba. And we would go to different communities in Manitoba, and the people would organize, and they would get their families engaged. There'd be kitchen meetings, and they'd go to political events, and their movements would grow stronger and stronger. And there were victories in rural Manitoba, and it was beautiful to watch. So that kind of stuff it keeps me going from day to day.
Thanks, Glen. I had mentioned how the apathy and government sort of getting that together, and where the apathy can really be redirected into positive work is if government takes a leadership role. And that's what has been missing forever, in that the best we've been able to achieve from government is like grant applicate. You can make an application to insulate your house, or you can do an application for a funding opportunity or something like that, but no real leadership when it comes to actually administering and project managing the solution. This is, I'm referring to Seth Klein's book, A Good War. If you've heard of his book, he recommends that, or he says what's necessary is that we need to take the kind of approach to the solution that was taken in 1940 to address that emergency, to recognize that it's an emergency and it needs special direction when it comes to the solution. Now, in that frame, I mentioned how I've been having positive meetings. Maybe I'm you know, a glass half full kind of guy. Maybe I'm naive, but the meetings that I've been having have been focused on some of the key recommendations that came out of that Road to Resilience analysis. And there's a lot of things, you know, social justice and things in climate change. It's you know, a very broad spectrum of issues that need to be addressed. But we focused on the energy issues related to the challenge of being able to heat all of our buildings, old and new, without fossil gas, and move all goods and people without gasoline or diesel. That's the energy challenge. That's where the fossil fuel burning is used. So we've got, in the Road to Resilience Energy Solutions, we've got again a comprehensive set of recommendations and that have been quantified. I'm an engineer, put numbers to this challenge, and how do we achieve the ability to provide enough power and enough energy to meet those challenges. And key in that, is the biggest challenge is heating our buildings. Transportation is another thing, but there's a lot more flexibility to it. There's a lot more options, but when it's 30 below, you've got to have heat in your house, right? And so in our solution, the key mechanism for solution is geothermal. And not geothermal at an individual level, but geothermal as a utility. That's how the fossil gas system was set up. Why not geothermal? And geothermal as in district systems, so that instead of just holes in your yard, if you're lucky enough to have a yard, or in the parking lot if you're in a multi-unit thing, but connected to a number of different buildings, all in a network that's managed, that's installed by and managed by a utility, and then you pay a monthly fee plus your usage. I've been promised that this is going to happen here in Manitoba. They're moving forward with it. In the last election, the NDP promised 5,000 geothermal installations, and I've confirmed it with Minister Sala that's just the beginning. This is just sort of proving ground. It's to figure out what the system is supposed to look like, and come up with the methodology for ultimately. My vision is that every building in this province is connected to a geothermal system. And that will provide not just the climate solution when it comes to the most challenging part of the fossil fuel movement away from that fossil fuel, but also the affordability aspect. It will be affordable for all the people in this province. And rather than that, that barrier to the apathy turning into action being, it's up to you to do it yourself, find the financing yourself and do the applications for the grants and stuff. No, it's an agency comes and says, we're going to do your block next. And we're going to do an energy audit. We're going to do energy upgrades. If you need energy upgrades, on a zero interest PACE loan, property assessed clean energy loan. And this is the kind of scenario that I'm in conversation with. And so far I've had, a receptive ear. So hope I'm not naive. I hope I'm not, but that's giving me some hope to keep working on this thing when maybe I should be retired. So.
Yeah, the question of hope is one that I think about a lot, and have talked to a lot of young activists in Winnipeg about. I think on the more sort of philosophical side, I guess what I've come to is subscribe to kind of Rebecca Solnit's school of thought, and others who talk about hope as more of like a responsibility and a commitment and sort of a choice that we have to make, because choosing despair is the easy choice. You can just say it's too late, it's too big, it's too hard, we're too small, we're just individuals, what can we do? That's still a narrative that I think we hear all the time. We have a big carbon footprint, we need to just drown in our guilt, there's nothing that can be done. That's what the fossil fuel industry would love us to believe. And so I think, we have a responsibility, especially those of us with privilege, those of us who benefit from settler colonialism and from the systems that uphold our sort of fossil fuel economy. We have that responsibility to kind of choose hope and to choose to not give up. And I think that even if we don't, even if we're not on track for our 1.5 degree target, we still have, there's still a huge span of like different scenarios we can end up in the years ahead. And there's always different projects that are worth working on and fighting for. I think within MEJC's work, what has given me hope or sort of motivation is when we can really plug into like bigger picture fights, whether that's like into, cross country and international solidarity with the Wet'suwet'en resistance to the Coastal GasLink pipeline out in BC, or through sort of campaigns that 350.org or other national organizations have held against RBC, working with Decolonial Solidarity, kind of plugging into something that's bigger and really feeling like, the greater sum of that impact that is bigger than our organization here in Manitoba, I think has definitely added like momentum to our fight. And I guess the last thing I would mention on the Silica Sands mine note is the CO Silica project out in to the west of the city. I think that we heard they was canceled, or that the new government found too risky. That kind of victory, I think, is hopeful to show, I think it's complicated, and like the news with this other silica sand mine being approved in Hollow Water is not what we want to hear. But I think looking at the organizing that did happen in Vivian, with kind of people going to hearings and signing petitions and all sorts of people mobilizing that I think maybe wouldn't identify as like environmental activists, or who hadn't necessarily been involved in that work before, is something inspiring to me. And I think that's what we need to win is, this isn't just about like people who identify as environmentalists being involved. This is like a cross-cutting fight. And the more we can kind of seek solutions that get to the root of those problems that intersect with, settler colonialism and all the other kind of broader systems that are driving climate change in our climate justice work, then the more success I think we'll have in like building those more unlikely alliances and really impacting or affecting change.
One of the pieces in Camp Morningstar that was really successful was our school-based program. And basically what we did was, the reason behind it is that we found it was so hard for people to understand where we were coming from, and that would never change until people get familiar with the worldview and how different it is from Western worldviews. And so we took the kids, we taught them what's behind ceremony, land. We taught them what's behind the language, land. We took them on the land, and we had them do observations with forests that had been cut down before, so resource extraction. And at the end of it, we would do something sacred. We would do prayer ties to ask the ancestors to protect Camp Morningstar and that particular property. So that was really positive. We put some beautiful letters of support. We could not keep up with demand. But it was hard enough. So there's only 3 or 4 of us that actually do all this work. So it was a tremendous piece. Unfortunately, that will have to end because the road from the mine is going to be too close to where we gather. In terms of organizing, again, what I really urge people to do is to get to know stories, right? To get to know different communities that might be suffering climate justice, injustice. I don't even like to call it climate justice. It's climate injustice, and it's happening. Because one of the things with organizing for us, and how many people here realize that the chief fired one of us and then put out a statement that we were not to talk negatively about anything in Hollow Water. And I heard a rumor at one point they were going to BCR anybody that wasn't from the reserve, which means they write a band council resolution. And then they realized that one of their councillors had a non-Indigenous wife. So they canceled that. I don't know if that one was true though. But there was suppression. And when your house and your water and your education and your job all depends on the chief, you shut up pretty fast. So again, part of this is to go out and ask and make friends and make, to see what is actually happening, because I'm sorry, but I resent being compared to CO Silica.
Thank you, everyone. Maybe building on that last one, because I think we all engage with Manitobans and with Canadians in a variety of different ways on Indigenous communities. I'm kind of curious, what would be, in terms of if when you're encountering people who are concerned about the environment, but maybe unsure of what to do or where to start or what resistance or change looks like, what would you, from your professional background, recommend one thing they could do to kind of start with that? Any thoughts? Share that.
I don't really know how you invite yourself into a community, right? To find out what the issues are. So I really can't answer that. I don't have the experience other than talk to people and find out who they are and what they're about, what's behind them. And I say I have wonderful, fabulous allies that have come out and, filmed us and put out production pieces and been on meetings where, we really don't get anywhere. And it was just a result of a conversation with someone. So just talk.
Well, along those lines, I talked about the road resilience policy work that we did, but sort of complementary to that, the climate action team also had a mandate to take sort of the basic scenario there and take it out into community. And so for the 2022, 2021, we spent like 2 years or something seeking out communities to engage with. And it wasn't easy. Because we had a mandate to engage with 5 settler and 5 First Nation communities. And it took a lot of effort to try to find a voice in the community that would invite us. If they had a green team or not, and if they didn't, then who do you talk to? And then even once we got an engagement into the community and an invitation into the community, who would attend? Like sometimes there would be 30 or 40 people all really engaged, and sometimes it'd be like 2. Right. And we couldn't really predict before we got there. But we then moved from those 10 communities to 4 communities that moved to phase 2, because we have funding for actually doing some programs and projects that actually would resonate with the community based on that engagement that we had. So that's just one example of a methodology, if you will, for how to move into community and engage with folks. So that's just a small example, and we had funding for it. We wouldn't have been able to do that without funding. So.
Yeah, interesting question. I mean, I've seen there are less and less people who want to volunteer in this sector. People are struggling, families are struggling. So what do you tell them if they're kind of interested? I mean, where I work, we make referrals. So, we find out, well, what's your interest? So what you like illegally stopping traffic on Portage and Main? You should contact MEJC. So it's like, yeah, there's lots of groups that do lots of different things. And as an organization, the Manitoba Eco Network makes those types of referrals.
Yeah, I guess I would just add to that. I definitely echo what MJ and Curt said about, the kind of relationship building at the core of that. I think it's also, it's kind of cliche to say, but like to Glen's point, like what is the thing that brings you, the skill that you have that you want to contribute to the movement, and being able to identify that. Like there's this kind of Venn diagram that I think about that, where they talk about what brings you joy, what kind of skills do you have, and now I'm gonna forget the third piece. What needs to be done? Yeah. So you kind of think about like what is at the middle of that, because I think me personally, like you can spend a lot of time in the movement doing things like research that I do in my day job that I'm then doing at like 9 p.m. at night, or things that kind of just make you a bit grumpy. And you don't want to show up in a grumpy way. So you want to, there's always going to be hard work to do that no one maybe wants to do, that still needs to be done. But I think it's also important to think about, what is it like? Is it art? Is it, what are the pieces that you feel like passionate about and that you can like bring joy into the movement, and offering those up. And I think we can do a better job as an organization and a movement at trying to like facilitate opportunities for people to bring all of those things together.
There was something that you said, Laura, about hope, and it resonated with me, and it reminded me of something that I learned a number of years ago, actually close to when I started to work on climate change, and it was talking about hope and optimism. Okay, and what's the difference between hope and optimism? And hope, in this definition, was the ability to see yourself in a better future. And I think that is essential, that we should always try to imagine a better future and dream of that better future and maybe put some structure to it, like road to resilience kind of thing, right? But then the other optimism is whether or not you think that's likely. And so I always have hope because I do have that picture of, as I said, all the buildings in Manitoba connected to geothermal. That's just part of it. Okay. And my optimism comes and goes. In the past 7 years, I had not that much optimism. In the last few months, I've got more. So that's sort of a reflection on what you said.
And for those who like podcasts, I'm listening to a new one now called The Doomer Optimist.
Any further follow-up? Nope. Okay, I know that we are past sort of the initial questions, but I did want to ask maybe if there's something that you're in your organization that you've previously run on or that you've currently used, that maybe you were hoping I'd ask you about, but I haven't yet. Is there anything there that, because I know we went past some of our regular questions, but if there was something that maybe from your notes or from your program that you're working on that you were kind of hoping I'd toss your way that I haven't yet.
Challenges, didn't we? Challenges and opportunities.
Yeah, go for it. Challenges for sure.
Yeah, challenges and opportunities. So just briefly, and following what's happening here in Manitoba with the new government, one of the big challenges right now, I think, is energy security, and you know, green energy is part of that, but one of the issues we're seeing is that our electricity, and if we want to electrify more in the future, it's all dependent on one source, and that's hydroelectricity. So, we had a drought 20 years ago, and we had to buy energy from Wisconsin and Minnesota, and Manitoba Hydro had a debt of $450 million that year. We had another drought 4 years ago, and now we're going to have another debt in this current fiscal year. So the 1 in 20 drought is becoming a 1 in 10 drought, could become a 1 in 5 drought. Who knows? I mean, the predictability of drought in this part of the world with global warming is not an exact science. So we really need to diversify our energy mix, and the climate action team and some of the work that Curt has done has some good ideas. The geothermal is great. A lot more wind. We have to deploy more wind, more solar. I'm kind of doing some research and kind of bought in, and green hydrogen looks like it could become something worthwhile getting into in this province, and more battery storage. Our hydro can have that backup with wind and solar, and the technologies for batteries are increasing by leaps right now. I mean, we can make batteries out of sodium and chloride. We don't have to mine lithium anymore. And of course, no nukes. Saskatchewan's big on small modular nuclear reactors, and that's not the way to go. We still don't know how to effectively and safely take care of the waste of that, and they're very expensive. And no mega dams. I think we got to put a moratorium on mega dams in this province, and just do a super diversification. And the one thing that we aren't talking a lot about, and I'm starting to talk to others in Saskatchewan anyway, but it's an east-west grid. East-west, west-east grid, and start moving power back and forth through the 4 western provinces. There'd be a whole lot of efficiencies there. And so those are some opportunities to explore, especially with some of the federal funding money that's out there.
Well, I don't want to bore you with details, but if you've given me a microphone, so okay. So along with diversification of generation, with a substantial amount more wind, road resilience, let's talk about that. But demand reduction is a big part of the solution, and storage. You touched on that with batteries, but there's also actually geothermal is a thermal storage system. It's not an energy source, it's a storage system. And it's a system where we put heat into it in the summertime when we've got too much of it, so that we've got heat that we can draw from it in the wintertime. And if you think about it philosophically, it actually aligns with an Indigenous worldview of, instead of the linear thinking of extraction, burn it and put it in the atmosphere, extract it, burn it, put it in the atmosphere, we've got a system where we take the heat that's in abundance from the sun in the summertime, we put it into storage, and then we draw it out when we need it in the wintertime. And that kind of philosophy of storage and reuse is really central to an alignment with the reconciliation worldview requirement of this revolution, and the climate change as well. And the other thing being demand reduction. Geothermal makes the use of electricity way more efficient. And we can take, if you take a building that's electrically heated right now and convert it to geothermal, connect it to geothermal, it will free up enough power to provide for 2 more houses if they are also connected to geothermal. About 45% of the buildings in Manitoba are electrically heated, believe it or not. If those are connected to geothermal, there's enough power freed up without new dams to provide the power required to heat electrically the remaining buildings. This is fundamental to the solution. And also, new buildings need to be as efficient as possible. And Laura's here, and the Sustainable Building Manitoba is focused on making sure that the building code is enhanced to support that movement to making our buildings as efficient as possible. And then the other aspect is deep energy retrofits, and we're trying to modify that in a way that's affordable for people through that PACE loan, that property assessed clean energy loan.
Yes, and I would add on to increased generation and increased efficiency by saying that, yeah, I think at the core of this, we also need to sort of evaluate the ability for us to continue, infinite growth of our energy system and our consumption. And MEJC, our group hosted a conversation about degrowth a couple weeks ago, which was really interesting. And I think is something that there's interest in, continuing to build into our work and our campaigns to really look at, at the core, even if we do successfully transition to renewable energy, we can't continue to scale it up and continue to extract and build, resources and cover like half the continent in solar panels in order to, meet growing energy demand. So I think demand side management or the energy reduction, using less, is a big part of it. And also, reimagining how we build cities, how we live our lives, how much we work. All of these things are connected to this question, I think.
That along those lines that Laura is bringing up is big, really important. We can't continue to grow the way we have. The road resilience analysis that we did, we were able to meet our needs into the future, but not at the same kind of rate of growth that we have been in the same kind of type of growth. We've been in Manitoba, we add something like a 1.5% to the number of cars in the province every year. This is what MPI says. And we can't supply that electrically into the future. I think our prediction said that we could come up with a lot more wind, with a lot more energy efficiency in buildings. We could supply it up into the 2040. But after that, there's no way, right? So why don't we start now reducing our dependence on vehicle transportation? That's part of it. And move away from city planning that allows for, 3,000 square foot houses on the outskirts of town that have no shopping or anything within walking distance, and get away from that kind of growth. So it's just a reflection on what you were saying, Laura. So.
Yeah, I really agree with, everything local. And I know that when I lived in cities. I mean, I took the subway in Toronto. I never owned a car, right? So it was all the infrastructure was there. So that's definitely a piece of it. But I worry about transportation in the north. From Grand Rapids to Thompson, I think it's about 500 kilometers, and I just don't see how electric vehicles are going to do that at this point. I don't see where the infrastructure is going to come for reserves. That's a federal responsibility, and I don't know if anybody's representing that. I've seen the best work done in the farthest community in northern Manitoba in terms of doing geothermal and integrating some of those technologies. Yeah, I was there. But still, you know, hunting the caribou and fishing and that's the other piece is that people don't realize that, you know, when these resource extraction projects come, you know, a moose will last you all winter. You know, you're taking country food away from people. The other thing, again, just because I have a bit of an audience here and there's things that you just don't think of unless you hook up with the communities that are experiencing it. So that's a piece because I've, you know, the Road to Resilience, your work is brilliant. And, you know, I really support that. But having been in the north, mind you, you know, we had a guy in a teepee for 3.5 years in 40 below weather. So they know how to survive. But dog teams are coming back. I'm serious. I'm really serious. Yes, they are. They're preparing. They've got the kids on the land and everything else. But there was something else I was going to say that resonated in terms of making sure that the needs of, you know, communities that may not be heard in a different way, I think is really, really important to put into the groundswell of support. So, for example, when you look at the reserve geothermal, the houses are all really far away, but we can do wind, right? We can do other things. And I know Akai is doing a lot of work in that area, and that's really, really good to see that they're actually at the forefront of some of these things. Why? Because the government can save money. But what I want you to realize too is that one of the things that we teach out at the camp is reciprocity. You know, when they tie the tree and ask the ancestors to protect the area for the rest of the time, you also say to them, you learned some things here today and you need to go forward and you now have a responsibility to teach that information to others and to share that information to others. So here's a little tidbit I'd like people to realize because I realize and I apologize for my behavior. It's a different land. I don't have very much more time on that land. And so I'm trying to use my voice as long as I can. And for example, when you talk about also reciprocity benefits, right, from what's going to happen. Do you realize that Hollow Water First Nation is going to lose its land? It's already lost some children to suicide because of this particular issue. And for giving up all that, there's a few jobs. People don't need jobs. There's actually a lot of employment in Hollow Water First Nation. There'll be some jobs for people, but they need treatment first, right? They need help getting to work and figuring that piece out. They need programming. But the part that really bothers me is that money from that piece is going to go to provincial coffers for the government to do whatever they need to do on their platform, healthcare, whatever. And our elder is still living in a moldy house, and that will not be covered because that's a federal responsibility. Same with healthcare. No access to healthcare or crappy healthcare. You know, they get into a hospital when their legs are going to be cut off for diabetes. That's when they enjoy a little bit of provincial healthcare, but the feds still pay for it. So we need to work on equity of, you know, these brilliant solutions, because as I say, I really admire the work that you guys have done. Yeah.
Yeah, I just wanted to echo all of that. I think, especially when we think about energy justice in Manitoba, we need to like really prioritize northern communities who have been really affected, destroyed, like displaced from hydro development in Manitoba, and think about, you know, what does energy justice, what is like prioritizing the transition in the north first look like with Indigenous ownership and leadership. And there was one other thing that that I was gonna add. I forget what it was. I forget.
It'll come back.
I just wanted to make a mention of the unique challenges of remote, especially remote First Nation communities, and especially winter road communities. Because I don't know if the winter road made it all the way to Lac this year or not. Because, anyways, I worked for 6 years in Barren Lands, Stacey Denny, and Northlands, and was part of that project that maybe that but in LAC the solution or the installation was it made use of biomass from the trees that were killed by forest fire, and it provided employment for people. It's the biggest employer in the community, the harvesting and transportation of those trees, dead trees. They're not green trees, they're dead trees, to the biomass plant. And then the operation of the biomass plant is all local people, and about 30% of the heat energy is now from biomass. And then the geothermal isn't in the ground, it's in the water. And there's a lot of remote communities that potentially could have water-based heat pump systems for providing a goodly amount of the heat for their communities, but their buildings need to be designed for the use. Instead of if the federal government ever gets around to building 4 houses in a year on a reserve, they're usually built to the standards that's appropriate for Illinois, but not for the 55th parallel. Right. And with the moisture issues and stuff like that. So really, there's an architectural challenge here that's not being addressed at all. So now I'm ranting. Sorry.
I just want to touch upon on the whole equity issue and talk about economic equity. Our organization works with 2 projects in the inner city, and people are struggling for having a house and food and looking for work. So all these ideas have costs. We're cranking up our water and sewer rates to fix the problems there. But there's a thing called water poverty. And we now know there's a thing called energy poverty. And when we look at designing the ways to pay for this kind of stuff, we have to design programs that addresses lower income families and people who can't afford to do the things that need to be done.
The last thing I would add is just coming back to that critical minerals conversation and related to remote communities. Like I think that is going to be one of the big, it's already is kind of one of the big focuses of this provincial government, similar to the last one. And I think there's going to be more and more industry coming into the province looking to extract critical minerals to be used for renewable energies. And I think we need to really closely evaluate, update our environmental assessment process and closely kind of scrutinize what these projects look like, who is behind them, and so on.
I'm ready for a nap.
One thing to keep in mind with respect to the energy, with respect to one thing to keep in mind with respect to the there you go. Okay. One thing to keep in mind that's sort of a hopeful thing with respect to the, we have to make sure that we mine in a respectful and a the proper way, for sure. But there's a difference to this extraction as opposed to the fossil fuel extraction, because the fossil fuel extraction is never ending. Every year, every day, every minute, we have to be extracting more and more and more. Whereas there's potential in the transition to more battery and solar kinds of energy sources, is that you go through a big challenge to get it converted, but then you don't have to keep on that treadmill, because once we have sufficient lithium batteries or whatever mineral it is, it's reused, and lithium, as I understand it, can be infinitely recycled. So once the vehicle transportation is minimized and converted to electric, you don't have to get on a treadmill that's a new treadmill. It's a treadmill that you sort of go through that transition, and now you're in a new place. That's a bit of a hopeful, we got to make that transition as respectful and mindfully as possible, but it's not an infinite treadmill.
Sorry there. Technology's only come so far. Thank you for that, Curt. I know we do have about 15 to 20 minutes remaining. I wanted to ask if there was any closing comments that the panel wanted to say, and otherwise I also wanted to open the questions up to the audience, and then I believe the Zoom questions as well, but those will maybe follow because I think there's a little bit of a extension there. Okay, maybe we'll go to questions then. I can run the mic over, Uche. Oh, you got one? Perfect.
Thank you so much for the wonderful presentation. I enjoyed it all. Thank you, Todd. And yeah, so I think it's the second time I'm meeting you. You talked about geothermal a lot, and I could see your passion. Also, noticed both of you talking about government leadership, how that plays a very significant role to both the energy sector and other sectors of our economy. I would say a little bit of background, but that would latch to my question, or that will connect. About 2008, a group of international students, we went to a village in Germany called Walmer, or you can call it Walmer. And there we were exposed to different kinds of energy sources. The geothermal you mentioned is called earthworm. So I misunderstood it. Like I thought it's an earthworm animal, but it's earthworming kind of geothermal. And we're introduced also to solar energy. We're introduced to biogas, and we're introduced to wind turbine. Actually, the size of a wind turbine, if 30 of us stretch our hand, join together, we might not cover it. So it's very huge. And transporting the blade takes a special kind of truck, and of course, environmental damage. And the noise it produces is also disturbing to people who live around that area, and the light as well. And of course, the animal bird also is an interference. If you're traveling from Austria to Hungary, you'll see a farm of sea of wind turbine. And an average cost of a wind turbine can reach up to $4 million US. And to maintain one can reach up to $42,000 per year. And we also, the biogas, there was a time was a rave, everybody was talking about biogas to generate energy. And Germany, a lot of companies built biogas company. Unfortunately, they finished importing corn from local farmers, and then went to Brazil, Amazon forest, expanded it, produced growing corn to feed the biogas plant. And that began to cause problem because of food insecurity as well. So instead of feeding people in a world of hunger, then you have these crops being fed to generate energy. Now you're talking about geothermal. My question is, because sometimes we look at the short term, but sometimes we don't anticipate fully the long-term implications of every technology. And as a student of innovation, I know that every technology have both advantage and disadvantage, long-term and short-term. Now, when you started talking about the geothermal, I started checking about some of the pros and cons. And so my question is, have we thought about the long-term implication? And of course, when we talk about these energies, it's also going to be probably multinational companies that are going to invest in them, probably transitioning. We talk about hydrogen energy. Now, Saudi Arabia is saving their petrodollar to invest in hydrogen energy, right? So the geothermal energy, one of the things I read is that it's going to also cause instability, like it could lead to earthquake. And again, when we are harvesting the energy underground and then bringing it up to heat our homes and all that, do we consider the imbalance it might have also in the earth crust, kind of? So the question is that, do we know the long-term, the short-term, and the long-term implication? Because we might clamor for it like we clamored for biogas or wind turbine and other forms of energy. And all of a sudden, we begin to realize that we didn't think about it through.
Yeah, thanks for giving me the opportunity to clarify, because I believe a lot of what you were referring to is geothermal energy, and I'm talking about geothermal heating. The two are different. Geothermal energy is deep wells that go deep enough to approach the mantle of the earth, molten rock. And so it gets hot enough at those latitudes or that depth so that you put water down the hole and you get steam back up that drives turbines and creates electricity. What we're talking about with geothermal heating is primarily having loops at low altitude, low depth, like maybe 3 meters down. You've got coils, or you've got wells that might go as deep as 300 feet, but not anywhere close to the 3 kilometers or 10 kilometers required to get to the strata that's hot enough to be able to create steam. So it's a different technology, it's a different solution. And in the analysis we did in Manitoba, we didn't need to generate any additional electricity from geothermal energy sources. However, it might be necessary in Saskatchewan and Alberta, because Saskatchewan and Alberta have got a different energy challenge. And you mentioned Europe and other jurisdictions. I don't know very much about the challenges in other jurisdictions. I focused on what the reality of Manitoba is and what the quantified solution is in Manitoba. And I focus on that because every jurisdiction has to come up with their own solution, because they've got their own sort of reality, their current reality that has to be addressed in terms of formulating a solution. But I do recommend quantifying the problem and then quantifying the solution.
Perfect. I understand that the next question is on Zoom. Is over Zoom, is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct. So I'm going to read the question from Ian Robson. How is the best way to get off the idea that biofuel from harvested crops is not really a way to cut GHGs? It keeps the trend of more GHG going. There's no possible math to suggest that transportation can be done using there is no possible math to suggest that transportation can be done using biofuels to replace fossil fuels. It's government program only that lets biofuel happen via subsidy. So I guess the question is, I suppose reflecting on that comment of how to get off the idea that biofuel harvested from crops is a GHG solution.
Yeah.
Is that clear?
Well, maybe this is an opportunity for me to clarify as well. When I brought up the word biomass, it's a hot button issue, and I don't recommend biomass for transportation fuels at all. But it does have a place in remote communities potentially when it's from trees that have been killed by forest fire. So it's very specific. There's also a potential. I mean, IISD has done some studies about cattails in regions that are perpetually flooded, where you might be able to manage the floodwater and create cattail biofuels for heat. But it's very limited and very geographically specific. So, and I would echo the concern about food for fuel debate. It's a non-starter as far as I'm concerned.
I was just going to agree with Ian and Curt. Yeah, growing food and combusting that in an engine is ridiculous. So that was a waste of money 20 years ago, and now we got all these $1 million plants still taking in feed. So it's an unfortunate investment at that time. At least Europe is talking, or they have rules now that they're not going to build new plants that take food and convert it into fuel. So we'd like to see that sort of legislation here in Canada and North America. Right now, 40% of the corn crop in the US is burnt in combustion engines. It's crazy.
It's another example of sort of these sort of called transition fuel scenarios, where they're actually just perpetuating the fossil fuel industry by things like carbon capture and sequestration, corn for fuel and stuff like that. Instead, look at what the ultimate solution is. And I say, reduce the amount of need for vehicle transportation, but any vehicles that are left should be electric. That's the ultimate solution.
We're at about 5 minutes left. Is there we had probably room for one more question if there is one? Yeah, I see one at the back there.
Hi. I just have a, like, I guess maybe a bit of an issue kind of question. How are we kind of looking at the fact that some people on this panel are specifically talking about working with governments and hoping it's better and being happy we have a better local provincial government in, you know, the highest position of power, but then also still continuing to have such major amounts of people being left behind, specifically Camp Morningstar. I mean, like, this was an unfortunate instance of just classic environmental racism. I would call it what it is. So, like, how are we working with this together to, like, we have very different ways of coming at it, but how are we working at getting over this hurdle? I'd like to hear from MJ specifically.
Yeah, I think, again, it's getting to know the story, because there's so many parts that people don't realize, that don't make it to the papers, that don't make it into common lore about what Camp Morningstar was about. But it really comes down to free, prior, and informed consent, what they were talking about this morning. We need to push for that. I'd be happy with free, prior, and informed conversations, because had the company talked to us, my son's an engineer, he's First Nations, he's from Hollow Water. He knew about the roads, and he knew that they couldn't get their sand across the dam in the amounts they needed to be feasible. But because there was no conversation, or no, it was done and sealed and delivered. By the time we found out about it, there was no opportunity. So it doesn't have to be, the governments are so afraid of that piece. But in fact, we can be collaborative. We could have saved them $30 million in, exploration dollars had they talked to us soon enough. Instead, the way the process works is they put their environmental review in, and then at the end, the whoever the TAC committee is for that particular area goes, oops, you can't go across that dam with that number of trucks. I mean, how is that good for so government can improve, and then we can also work together to try and get those improvements in there. The big thing is too, is that what we can't do, or what's going to be very, very tough, is to change the Indian Act. We're actually here today because of failures in what was termed consultation. So, for example, when it got to the Section 35 consultations, which are way down the road, same with the public consultations, way down the road. I mean, they practically got their first building built by the time you get to those consultations. Section 35, you're supposed to be able to pick somebody who can run the meaningful consultations. Chief and council picked an individual who had been signed the original MOU for the mine, and who had had the mining portfolio. And because there was so much dissension within the community, they decided that they would design a program that would put 13 different meetings. So if you're, 24 on a Tuesday in the city, you go to this meeting. If you're a woman, it was ridiculous. So nobody was in the same room to know if the report that went to the government was actually what happened in any of those meetings. Of course, I could, I'm not at all those meetings anyway. But so, due process, when letters were written to complain about the process, they weren't even answered. So how do you get Section 35 to be something that is actually legit? How do you get consultation? The other thing is, in the Indian Act, you can have 5 people around the table. If 3 of them say, we agree the mine should go, that is considered consultation. In business, if you phone to say that you're, say, for example, those people up in Camp Morningstar, they're playing the drum too late at night and they're keeping us awake or whatever, that's considered consultation. So we really need to look at what's happening in consultation. And again, what you need is people. You need people to get behind these things, to understand them and say, that's got to change. I don't know about the Indian Act. The Indian Act was designed to allow mining, right? So I don't know anybody. I don't think Liberals or any party is going to have the political will to work on consultation. But I think that the politicians are reading the room wrong. We did a a protest last week. Some of my friends who helped design that protest, we took realty. We made our own realty signs, sold, and we made up a company for beaches. And we went to every beach in southern Manitoba and said, your beach has been sold. How do you feel about that? And then we said, just kidding, but this is what's happening to us. It was really unique. It was a wonderful day. Unfortunately, we only had the one day because 95 or 98% of the people said that once they understood what was going on, that it was not right. So it really is about, we need a national, body on Indigenous issues alone because of the Indian Act and all the things that go into you being a federally run. So I really appreciate the question and just keep asking questions. Now, the other thing that's happening is that we have two ways of thinking, and I've talked to Wab Kinew before he was premier. He's going to be prime minister next. But the problem was it was a community trap line. So our argument was therefore, regardless of what you can do according to the Indian Act, it should have been a community consultation. To take that anywhere, you've got to end up at the Supreme Court. As a grassroots exercise, we're relying on hockey pools. We're not going to be able to go to the Supreme Court. So trying to find legal representation, period. We had a little bit from PILC because it's all that they could offer, right? We really don't have. Now, the chief, when we took him to court for firing somebody that was with Camp Morningstar to set an example, he had a lawyer. We didn't have a lawyer. Don Sullivan, did the work for us. Loved Don. He passed away. And he was our guiding light for environmentalism and policy wonk kind of person. And of course we lost, like we're up against, one of the best law firms in the city, but it was to make a point that we're not going to back down. Does that answer your question? Yeah. Okay.
For sure. Does anyone else want to comment on that? Glen?
I just want to add is, when a community is impacted, there's a wealth of knowledge in that community. They know where the water is, they know where the trees are growing. It's like people who live in the areas where they live, they know it. And that knowledge is amazing. So to help in a campaign, you just have to find the people who understand all those different things. So you find a lawyer who understands the law, you find an engineer who understands how things are built, and everyone does what they need to do to help the cause. But the most important thing is some of us, we could talk to governments and we could do that. Some of us all do different things very well. The important thing is we all need to talk together all the time to keep us informed as to what's happening. So when you do a campaign, you're doing it together, and everyone plays the role that they have to play, from the community level to all the way to the premier's office. So everyone has a common understanding and end goal.
All right, that takes us to 3 o'clock. I want to thank again all the panelists for coming out, sharing their time and stories with us, as well as their expertise. I want to give everyone a big, please give them all again one more round of applause. I'll turn the mic back over.